Eternal Spirit, may the concepts that we hold today in this meeting be those of wisdom, of service, and of right action. In every thought, word, and act, may we show complete accord with universal law. Thank you and welcome, everyone. I'm really honored for our guest today, David Goldstein. I hope I've actually pronounced it right. I should know. um, I've known David, I don't know, like at least a couple years, maybe a few years now, and for some
Mm.
reason, he seems to be one of the first people that I connect with around like really important news. Like right before I started running for president, we had a phone call, and he was one of the first people I told I was going to do that. Right before I got married, he was one of the first people I connected to. I don't know, there's just something really special about David where we're in resonance quite a bit, although we don't always agree on everything, but I love his point of view. I love the way he shows up in the world. I love just how human he is, how much he's experienced, how candid he is, how he just keeps moving forward and he finds humor in what I think are some challenging times. And so I just really appreciate that I've met him and that he's been in my life, and I invited him on the show because I believe that he has a story that is inspiring and educational and empowering so that anyone tunes in can live a more fulfilling life. And so it's truly an honor to have you here with us, David. I appreciate you and thank you for being open to connecting with me and being open.
I love all of our interactions. Like I told you, I'm so flattered that you'd invite me on here, and it's always exciting to speak with you and connect with you. So this is absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. So I'm curious, you have just a very interesting background, and I don't know it all because like when we connect, we talk about like, I mean, we're present when we connect. None of that other, stuff that's changing all the time. That doesn't seem to be the focus of our conversations. Like our conversations seem really real. But I'm kind of curious, like, to learn more because you have like a political background and a spiritual background, and you're a family man. And like, I'm curious if you're willing to talk a little bit about just kind of like where you come from and what drives you, what makes you you, whatever, you feel like sharing.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Like all modesty aside, I have a very unusual background, and I feel it's almost like my responsibility to honor how strange it is by kind of pulling what lessons you can get and that I can get from, having grown up and differently and having experienced life, just getting a very, very unique hand of cards dealt to me. It started before I was born. My mother is from Sri Lanka, and she decided to become a Catholic nun when she was 17. She wound up in Belgium, and that's where she met my father, who is not Belgium. He's an American Jew, and he was trying to avoid the Vietnam War. And so he went to Belgium. And it was a very random, complete chance meeting, but they fell in love. And even stranger is when they got back to the US, they wound up settling in Kansas, of all places. So I think you can imagine how unique somebody with a Sri Lankan Jewish background is in a place like Kansas. You really can't overstate it. What kind of further happened to me was I connected with a guy who was technically a voice teacher when I was 15, but it was so much more than that. He was a mentor, a teacher, like another father. He was incredible, and he changed me in some really fundamental ways by pointing out to me the way things, were, why they were like that, and how I myself could get involved to change those things for the better, not just through the artistic lens with music, but even in all kinds of ways with like activism and volunteering. So that was a gigantic blessing. And then when I was in college, I'd been on this route to become an opera singer. And then all of a sudden, at the age of 21, I started to have back pain, and then my left hand curled up on me one day, and I found out that it was because I had cancer in my spinal cord. And it was potentially very deadly. And, you know, I spent a year in surgeries and doing radiation to cope with that. And when it was all said and done, I was as cured as I could be with that. But I'd also, lost use of my legs for a long time, lost use of one of my arms for a while. And then I completely lost use of my operatic singing voice too. And I had to find another path. And that was traumatic because I'd been studying so hard for 7 years. And I think anybody who's in a position where you're doing one thing and one focus day in, day out, and you're making sacrifices and you pledge yourself to it and you gain some kind of mastery of this, all of a sudden it's ripped away from you against your will. It's hard to find your footing again. But again, I got so lucky, Serene. One of my closest friends was here in New York City, and she was dating this wonderful man who happened to be a political consultant. And I had, my primary interest is music, but then my secondary interest is politics. And he and I got along great. We bonded immediately. And so he said, if you're looking for something, I can just set you up with my old job. They love me, go to it. And sure enough, based solely on his recommendation, they gave me a job. And that was 17 years ago. And so in that time, I've again been fortunate in the opportunities that have come my way. I got to work for President Obama, which was, for me, a dream come true, but also extreme learning experience. I've gotten to do groundbreaking work and studies. I've gotten to master all kinds of different things that I think are extremely difficult to get hands around. And, I find myself here, going on 44 and so proud of a career that I'm not even worried about a midlife crisis like some of my friends are going through, because it's like, what else do I have to do? And this whole time, I've been with a woman who was with me through the darkest of the dark days. And we wound up married, and, we made, thirsty. We made a decision a few years after we got married to expand our love by bringing some life into it. And that was tough because around the same time is when my older brother died, who I had been extremely close with. And it was really almost like a twin for me. We were both interested in spiritual things, intellectual things. We could finish each other's sentences. And, I always tell people who are like uber rational and uber, there's no, they're not only atheists, they're like super atheists, like they won't even entertain any like psychic phenomenon or, anything like that. I'm like, I always say like, your model for viewing the world doesn't incorporate the known facts of my life. And the biggest example I can give is that at the exact same time my older brother was passing from this earth, my son was coming into it. So Amy actually, my wife, she threw up at my older brother's funeral. And it was almost like a joke between us, like, haha, you might be pregnant. We go home, and the first thing we find out is she's pregnant. And the odds of that happening to me are 1,000,000,000 to 1. But they did. And, I think it's part of my great fortune in life. As I was getting sick and as I was trying to work my way through it, I got very involved in Buddhism and decided to convert to Buddhism. I've embraced all of the theology around it. And because of that, it wasn't psychologically jarring for me to deal with that fact. In Buddhism, the concept of rebirth isn't you die and then you come back. It's one life ends, another begins, but that new life has been shaped by the old life, right? So it's very easy for me to look at my son and treat him as his own human, his own personal being, and everything else, but also to understand how my brother's life shaped his and is shaping his. And it's the greatest blessing because when you lose somebody close to you, all you can think of, right, is all the opportunities I missed, all the things we never did together, all the things he never got to see. But when that kind of thing happens, where you lose somebody and somebody else comes in at the same time, that's when you understand that concept of a circle and a circle and a circle of cycles. And it's, the teacher Ram Dass once told parents about the child they lost, like she did the work that she was meant to do on this earth, right? And I don't understand it, you don't understand it, but it's complete for her. So that's why she moved on. And that is what really drove it home for me and dealing with what happened to my older brother. It's like, look, there's plenty of things I wanted him to stick around for, but he did his work. And then to immediately see that come around again with my son is really I really view it as a genuine modern day miracle. And it's a responsibility, but incredibly precious gift to me as well, that I continue to nurture that, and do what I view as my responsibility and what's asked of me to be able to participate in that miracle and to honor that. So yeah, I think sorry that was so long, but I think that just about covers where a lot of the unique aspects of my life come into, and I continue to live with and experience.
Thank you for sharing all that. I didn't know all that about you. I knew certain pieces, and that's another reason that I wanted to, have these conversations, is to get to know my friends better, and also just to share with others like what other humans go through and how to overcome these, what some people consider challenges very gracefully. I mean, I'm noticing, or I'm picking up from what you shared, that you're very perceptive and very intuitive. You've developed these faculties from within yourself to see things as they really are. And it also seems like you've mastered non-attachment, which is a really great skill to have in life, to be able to, go with the flow, ride the wave.
Right.
And you adapt really well. I mean, that's just so beautiful that you can do that. You've had some really serious challenges in your life, and you just keep moving forward, and you're logical. Even from a scientific perspective, what you described, it's like energy can't be created or destroyed. It's just perpetually transmuted into some new form, and it's evolving in consciousness, right? So your son is a higher level of consciousness, than your brother, and he's here to do something else. He's the newer version, right? And that's really just beautiful, like the way that you presented that. And Buddhism is really fascinating because I studied theology, and I've studied a lot about Buddhism. One of my favorite tenets comes from Buddhism, about having like a intense longing for liberation. Like you have to have that first before it comes. I just love that.
Yes. Yeah.
But something else from Buddhism is it's not really like a religion like others. There's no worshiping of a god, is my understanding. It's kind of just you're honoring all expressions of life.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, that's something I kind of go back and forth on a lot, because there is not, Buddha was specifically asked, "Are you a god?" And his answer, I think his answer was what almost converted me to Buddhism on the spot, was, "I am awake." Right. And that's an incredibly powerful way to confront the kind of the God, non-God, divine, non-divine element of our experience. And I think, what I do see as religious in Buddhism is the concept of faith, right? Like there is an element of just faith that I've had of Buddhism for 20 years now, where it's like, I know if I stick to this, I will get to where I want to, right? And and that's partially experience based, because you do experience like little snippets of liberation as you kind of move down the path. So you know there's something to it. But a lot of times it's just trusting in my teachers, trusting in, the sutras, trusting in people who've come before, that if I stick to this and I invest in it and I give it my love and time and energy, there is going to be, an outcome for me that matches my desire, and energy for it.
I appreciate you bringing up faith because even, in scientific work, when a scientist comes up with a theory, there's a certain amount of faith behind it, until they can prove it, and it is required. Like some people, when I talk to them about faith, they always think about like faith in God. It's like, no, there's faith in yourself, faith in others, faith in the natural order of things, just how the universe works. And there are certain things that we just can't measure. Like I think about the placebo effect and why it works for some people, not others. Like, how can you measure faith? Because that's what it
Right.
depends on. And that's something we're never going to be able to measure. At least that's my theory.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And it's like, to what degree do we really need to? When I talk to atheist friends about faith, it's a very easy question. Like, do you have faith your wife loves you? Do you have faith your children love you? And of course they do. If they're if they're willing to, if they're willing to concede the point. Um, and so I'm just like, well, what's the difference between faith there and the faith that I'm telling you that I have? It's just honestly, yours is more culturally acceptable, talked about, more mainstream, where mine is not, but it is the same thing.
I used to identify as agnostic. I think that was the word I used, where it was basically like I didn't want to have a conversation about God because I couldn't find like a universal definition. But eventually I got to the place where I realized, well, God is however I define that word. I don't have to accept what somebody else tells me because I was raised predominantly Christian, a Russian Orthodox, really, really strict, religion. And I went to Catholic school for 8.5 years. And so I couldn't stand the hypocrisy around me. I'm like, I don't get it. This is what they teach, but this is how they live. And it just really turned me off. And then I started getting into metaphysics, which isn't like religion or new age. It's really like correlating like physical and social sciences and theology and kind of looking at them and realizing they're all saying essentially the same thing, but using a different vocabulary. And that's when I realized, like, okay, God for me is this great unknown. It's a first cause. It's an X, like in mathematics, that I can solve for without knowing what it is. And I'm okay with that because I recognize, like, I'm an aspect of this great unknown that's everywhere, that gives you life, gives me life, gives the plants life, gives the animals life, or it's in every single electron, and it's just a different level of consciousness beyond the human mind. But like you said, something like a lot of your faith comes from these experiences you've had. And whenever I speak with atheists, I find that it's because they haven't had certain experiences that they don't have the same faith or belief systems as me. Right? It's like I do believe that there is just one life everywhere because of the experiences I've had, but that's not mental. That's, spiritual. That's like at a soul level. I don't have the words to describe that, but I know through experience, through observation, and, I do my best to take my emotion out of my reasoning processes because I found like when I rely on emotions for me come from conditioning and they're not always accurate, and I'm still working on like learning how to reason correctly and directing my emotions correctly, because it's like I project, right? Like everywhere I go, I bring all of me with me. I try my best to stay in the present, but I have all this past, I've got 4 decades of past experiences that, from this life that I'm carrying with me. So I might come into a situation that reminds me of something else, but I might not be accurate, and so there's just a lot to it, in as far as where I'm at in my journey.
Totally cool. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Um,
So oh, go
there's
ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say there's one interesting thing. There's a multitude of interesting things you brought up, but there's one that you know kind of occurred to me, especially when you said it, was this aspect of hypocrisy in religion. When I first got into Buddhism, my mother was pretty like not happy because for her, growing up in Sri Lanka, the Buddhists, even the most, highly revered, top level guys, helped start their civil war. And it was the Buddhist monks who carried out killings and assassinations and all the rest of it. So she had directly seen severe Buddhist hypocrisy, right? And I hadn't, because when it came over here to the West, all of that stuff got cleaned out, right? Like there's this giant filter. And then everybody who actually, all the Buddhist teachers who got here, were actually freed from having to explain that. And I think that is really crucial that we understand that about whatever paths we choose in life. We need to be on guard for hypocrisy within ourselves, but also not destroy what's available to us simply because we see how others have been hypocritical. And that's something that I always am very wary of, because it's very true. People will just toss out entire thousands of years old thought systems that have been venerated and validated simply because there was somebody who said they believed in it, but then cheated on their wife or stole from
Mm.
their job. And they really, what they're doing is inflicting upon themselves really unnecessary harm with that.
I really, really appreciate you bringing that up because I was having a conversation with somebody about this yesterday, over email about, separating the teachings from the teachers,
Right.
right? Or the believers or whatever, and because I've been through a lot of experiences in my life where especially like since I've gotten into studying metaphysics, where I would idolize my teachers, which is really dangerous. And I don't do that anymore. But I had to go through that from my own experience. But it would be painful when I recognize they're just as human as me.
Right, right. And
And
that's amazing lesson,
yeah,
right?
and,
I mean,
and
to
yeah,
me, yeah.
yeah. But like, I don't know why. And I'm grateful for it that I've been able to be like, okay, I don't want anything to do with this person anymore. I learned what I needed from them. I really learned like how not to be, like why integrity matters more, why I need to work on me. I've learned that they're
Yes.
human, but like I'm going to keep with my studies. I'm going to keep with this work. I'm not going to throw it away because some people I've introduced to some of the work I study have had similar experiences and they come back and give me all their books and they just completely throw it away. And it's like,
Yeah,
wait a minute.
I know it's to me, it's almost a denigration of how powerful we ourselves are, right? It's like you have to, that possibly is another area where faith comes in. We have to believe in ourselves enough to know that even though this person maybe wasn't able to overcome it or use these teachings to get past this, that doesn't mean that we can't, right? We have to trust in ourselves on that level. And also just, the lesson to me is always about, our shared humanity. I spent several years with some Zen teachers, and one of them told me this great story about his Japanese teacher, where the Japanese teacher had come over to the US. He'd gotten a bunch of American acolytes, and then they all found out that he was an alcoholic, and they flipped out, right? Because they were just like, non-attachment. How can you be an addict and be a teacher? And he just looked at him with a shocked look on his face. It was like, you guys can go. He's like, I'm not holding you here. It's just like if I need to go back on the streets, I will. Like he's like, my alcoholism is, what I'm working on with myself. If you think that that invalidates everything else I've taught you, all these years and years of progress you've had with me, then please, go find another teacher who you don't have that with. He's like, but I don't understand why you're angry at me. Like, I would have told you at any point, I'm sorry, but you don't have to stay here. And that, to the gentleman I was speaking with was so powerful, right? And just such an act of love and compassion where he was like, I understand why you're angry at me, but you have to understand that you have made progress here. And your anger at me shouldn't destroy the work you've done. But if you think it will, then please, right? Find somebody else. He's like, but I'm not a cult leader. I'm not, going to ruin you at your job or something just because you walk out of here. I've always loved that story. It's always meant the world to me because it just, our human frailties, which obviously I don't actually believe are frailties, they pop up all the time. And you have to have such compassion for yourself, and just say, like, this is part of the human experience. This is part of being me, but I can work with this, and I can continue to progress down the path.
I really appreciate that. Like, it reminds me of just, some of the teachers I've had that I've experienced like the most pain or disappointment with. I was very conscious, like, if not in the beginning, but towards the end of separating with them, that this was no longer healthy for me. But at the same time, in my mind, I'd be asking, like, are they testing me? Is this part of the learning? But it is not necessarily their intention, but it's life's way of teaching us. It's like whatever we're ready for to overcome next, it will come next, and then we learn from it and then we don't repeat it. So I
Yes.
appreciate it in hindsight, and it's just, it's not always easy when you're there. And I'm grateful, like, now that I'm completely free, and that I'm studying on my own and not like attached to any group or person. Um, Something else that you said has got me thinking about scripture. As I study a lot of scripture, and I'm not, as mentioned, religious or anything like that, but I honor everything in life, or do my best to do that. Oh, can you hear me? Okay, sorry, it looks like I might have
Yeah, yeah,
frozen.
yeah.
Okay, as long as you can hear me, I'll go ahead and speak, and hopefully the video catches up. So something I've been meditating a lot lately is understanding a verse in scripture, which is, many are called and few are chosen. And, it sounds kind of, I don't know, almost like elitist to say that, like, sometimes. Like, but then I was thinking, like, what does that mean? Like, many are called, and you feel free to, share your comments, but I was thinking, like, it means, like, I think all of us are called to overcome our carnal nature and be more spiritual. And I think that's what the calling is about. And I think the chosen are the people that actually do overcome their carnal nature. And we do have a lot of them throughout history, like starting with Zarathustra and Muhammad and Siddhartha, and Jesus and stuff like that. But, like, even Jesus said that there will be others that do even greater things than him. So that's always inspiring to me. And it's just, like I said, I was thinking about that, like, what does that mean? And that's something I aspire to. But again, like, I know I'm human. And so I always, try to remind people of that. Don't put me on a pedestal, because I've had that happen too over the years, where, like, even celebrities have put, like, my picture up on a wall. It's like, no, no, no. I don't want that. I'm human. Don't do that, because I'm going to disappoint you.
Right, of
um,
course. Of course.
but it's just something interesting, because I feel like there's a lot in various holy books that, um, the religions formed around them have misinterpreted or misrepresented, that in a way enslave people or keep people from actually attaining,
Mm.
union with the divine or oneness with all life, cosmic consciousness, whatever you want to call it. But I do believe it's possible if we have the discipline and the aspiration and the will, and that's all stuff that we can develop if we choose to. And like it, I mean, I think for you, it sounds like you've been choosing that path very consciously, and that's why you've gotten so far in your life, and that you, like, it's just amazing, these beautiful experiences that you've had in your life, where I know that other people wouldn't have, responded to them the way that you have, and they would have blocked, like, this beauty from coming into their life, versus you just went with it. Yeah, I'm just so moved by that. Sorry, I had to go
Thank
back.
you, Serene. No, I appreciate that so much. So to what you were saying first, when it comes to scripture, I think this is true of all religious and spiritual texts. It can be difficult for us as, a reader or listener to know when the text is addressing the small self, like our ego self, our perception of ourselves as separate, and our big self, right? Like our union with the rest of creation. And so to me, I love that phrase, many are called, few are chosen, because it's more like we all feel the pull of the divine. I really believe that, right? But the number of people who can actually get past that ego death stage, right, and really cross over to that deeper transcendence, it's a huge filter, right? And so what that phrase has always said to me is this is really hard, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Just know that, many billions of trillion, are going to be called to it. But be aware of the fact that if you'd like to pass through, as you have that energy you want to be, it is going to be hard. And that part of it, I really embrace. What has worked for me really well is I was an Iraq war protester in college, and a professor pulled me aside and he was like, you can't stop this war. And I was like, and he was like, they're getting this war. They're going to have this war. You can't stop it. And I was like, why, you were a Vietnam War protester. How could you say this to me? And he's like, I'll tell you why. He's like, my teacher from the Vietnam War was this one man who would go to the White House every single day and hold a candle in front of the White House. He did this during Lyndon Johnson. He did this during Nixon. This was his protest. Some days there would be hundreds of people, if not thousands, joining him. Some days it would just be him, like in the rain, trying to keep the flame alive. And a reporter asked him one day, why are you doing this? Do you really think you can change the country? And the man's response was, oh, I'm not doing this to change the country. I'm doing this so the country doesn't change me. Right. And that to me is the extraordinary power of this path. Right. There's so many things pulling on us. Right. There's so many things in that filter between, the many being called and the few getting in, that if we're not practicing in this way with kindness and compassion at all times, it's easy to get yanked down that path. And so ultimately, we're doing this for creation, but we're also very much doing this for ourselves, which is not something people should shy away from, because I think that's not being selfish with the small s, that's being selfish with the big S, right? Because it's seeing that unity.
I really appreciate that because it reminds me of, how do you be in this world but not be of it? Because that is something that those of us that are more consciously spiritually inclined have to balance. Like to be of service to life, you can't let all the carnal behaviors around you influence you. You've got to, find a way to ground yourself and to remember why you're here. And yeah, like I have a lot of different practices before we got on today. Like I made sure I did restorative yoga for half an hour. I'm like, I need to make sure I reset my nervous system, that I'm present with him, because I want to give 100% and I want to receive 100%. And that's,
Yeah.
a lot of people don't think that it's important. Oh, I don't have time for that. It's like, but if you don't make time for these things that center you and remind you who you are and how much control you have, then you're just going to go out in the world and be pulled in all these different directions, it tends to get the best of you.
It really does. I taught in university for a while. It was a kind of like a data statistics class. But what I always told my students, because we would have like a 20-minute, like real world, like this is what's going to happen when you get out of college type conversation. I'd always tell them, I'm like, you can't work with assholes, because what do you think is going to happen? Are you going to make them better, or are they going to make you worse? right? And the odds of being 21 and not getting pulled in a worse direction, I'm like, that's why you have to surround yourself with people who are at the very least neutral, right? So you can continue to develop yourself. And if you're not, you got to get out of there, right? It's just not going to be good for you over the long term.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I'm really enjoying having these conversations with friends is it feeds me at a soul level. This is my
Yes.
nourishment, so I can go into the world and spread more love and light. It's and hopefully you as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. It's energizing on a very profound level, and in a very literal way, I'd say.
Hmm. I'm curious because there's not a lot of people that are involved in politics that are as committed to their spiritual journey as you are. How does that work for you? Like, I mean, yeah, how do you go into those situations when you're meeting with people? I mean, I'm not asking like, do you say, oh, I'm Buddhist, but do you share some of your values? Do you find opportunities? And have you noticed the impact with the people that you engage with?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think that a lot of times politics gets a bad rap, maybe because there are a few more bad apples, right, than in most industries, and those bad apples tend to get the headlines. To this day, some of the most extraordinary, wonderful, just wonderfully intentioned, well-meaning folks I've met have been politicians and their staff. There are people who are involved in politics who are extraordinary beings and deeply spiritual. So there have been times where, I've been in a meeting and it's all of a sudden switched over to discussions of, experiences of meditation or, enjoyment of a spiritual book. And when I was younger, it caught me off guard. But when I was older, I came to appreciate how a lot of folks were there for the same reasons that I was, where we viewed it as public service, and that the corrupt part of politics was that compromise part, right? Where, you are giving up something that's important to you to get at something deeper, hopefully, to try and move that along. Um, and not simply to enrich yourself or, to enrich other people. Most of the people in politics are still quite poor. So if their hope was to enrich themselves, they've definitely failed. And so I think that's what I've always been very open to, not in both the political and corporate world, is not having a prejudgment of these people simply because of the context of finding them. And it's really amazing what you can pull out of people when you're open to the fact that there's going to be depth that you can't even imagine in them if you kind of hang in there and give it the space to be able to come out. It's really amazing.
I really appreciate hearing that perspective because, you're right. You didn't say this, but this is what I heard is like the media, where we learn about what's going on in politics tends to highlight the bad apples. And it's with any industry, that the media, it's for some reason seems more profitable to share bad news than good news, right? And there, are so many more people doing good out there than bad, but it's just not as exciting to hear about them yet. And at least one of the things I'm working on is that eventually we will highlight more of these good behaviors, because people in politics are typically considered authority figures, and to hear about like they're meditating, they're reading, books on spirituality, that's really inspiring to hear. I appreciate that a lot, David. You
Yeah,
give me hope.
that's fantastic. There's almost nothing in the world I love more than hearing that, to be honest.
Yeah. Um, So I'm curious, like what is like on your heart and mind the most these days? Because I've been kind of leading the conversation, but I'm just wondering, like, what is it that's drawing your attention and energy the most these days?
Oh, well, that's a beautiful question. I think what I've kind of worked very hard in my meditative and spiritual practices to develop as my basic attitude, which is how can I help? right? How can I be of service? And that's always a two-way question, right? It's like, where is help needed, and can I actually provide the help that's needed here? You know, and it's looking at the world and saying, okay, there's so many things wrong. There's a lot, but I also know that there's so many things right. Right? I mean, that's just shown by the fact that there's somebody like me being like, how can I help these people who I'll never meet, and I want to do well for them. So that's the big question for me, and I try to not view it across levels at all. And what I mean by that is, if I'm asking how can I help, I could be the one who needs help. It could be my kids, it could be a friend, it could be my community, it could be my country, it could be the world, right? It might be some kids, in Sri Lanka, it might not be. And what I have always found, Serene, is if you ask that question, the world answers it, right? It's just this unbelievable thing. I remember, like, and these almost happened like back to back. A friend of mine wanted to tackle the very difficult subject of toxic masculinity. And then another friend wanted to help people in Ukraine deal with the Russian invasion. And I offered to help both of them. And as they developed, the toxic masculinity thing fell apart. No ill intention, just things couldn't come together. But the Ukraine thing came together beautifully. And I've been devoting so much time and energy to that, for most of the past year. And so it wasn't an intention of mine to pick Ukraine over toxic masculinity. It was just that universe answering the question for me because I asked it, and I'm always struck by that a person who asks the world that question will just always get an answer. So that's always for me the number one thing, right? Is like, how can I help?
I appreciate that, and I can relate to that in my own life where like I used to go after certain goals, I guess, and I would get what I wanted, but I wouldn't feel the way I expected to feel after getting it. And so I just started surrendering and realizing this isn't about me anymore. This is about
Right.
serving life and being of service wherever I can, however I can, as long as I'm making sure I'm, whole first, because I used to give more than I had, and that creates all kinds of imbalance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that kind of lack of fulfillment when you reached your goal was because it was like a task your smaller self had picked out for you, or do you think it was just tough for you to put together something that would ultimately satisfy what you were looking for?
Well, I think, when I was younger, I mean, I still consider myself young, but when I was a couple decades younger, 2 to 3 decades younger, I thought that what would fulfill me was, the messages I was receiving from the world, like material stuff. I was a shopaholic. Everything was designer, like Gucci, Dolce and Gabbana, Versace, and cars, getting a new car every 6 to 9 months, and I grew up really, really poor. So perhaps that's why I went to this like complete extreme. It's like, oh, I want to make money. And then I just got really turned off by a lot of the people
I
that I
see.
was meeting in those worlds. It's like, I don't want to be like these people. They're not really nice. They're not really they're not really healthy. Like, I don't want to spend time with most of them outside of work, and so I
Right.
left all that, and I had a bit of an identity crisis, kind of like you. I felt forced to change my path because I thought I was going to stay in a certain career and industry forever, and then I realized it's destroying me from the inside out. And so, I took time out, and I've just been doing my own thing for 13 years now, and it's been amazing. And at first it was kind of scary, but it's like I realized that, spirit recognizes its own. When you're serving life, all your needs get taken care of. And not everyone gets that. Again, it's very experiential and it's scary at first because you're going against the mainstream. But like if you're just giving because you believe it's what you're supposed to do, life will give to you everything that you need to keep doing that. But and again, it's like balance is so important. And that, that's something I'm working on because I've tended to get sucked into other people's, dreams and visions and been, means to their ends. I realize like, I got to be careful. Like people see that I have certain skills and talents and they want that for carnal reasons versus I want to share it for spiritual reasons.
Right, right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, just as you were talking, it kind of occurred to me, that without even knowing it, I've become very like anti-goal oriented. Like I just don't believe in setting goals. I just believe in living and doing and thinking right. Um, thinking back to that Vietnam War protester, he was a complete failure at stopping the Vietnam War. He was a complete success at making sure his country didn't change him. Right. So it's that aspect. And what's fascinating to me to think of is like, what if he had stopped the Vietnam War? Would that have made him happy? And it's like I would submit that if he didn't have that orientation of do this so it doesn't change me, even ending the Vietnam War still would have left part of him feeling empty, right? Because it still would have had that element of grasping. And Buddhism, they always compare it to grasping at like running water. You just can't ever hold it because it's always flowing. I think that would have been the result because I've seen that in so many friends who've accomplished fantastic things, but still aren't content. They're not satisfied.
I can relate to that immensely. Like, I think, yeah, we talked about it. I guess now I think it was 2019 or 2020, whenever I was first running for president. Like, I had a
Mm-hmm.
vision of running. I wasn't attached to any outcome. Like, being president or not being president, it doesn't make a difference to me. It's about being myself and helping others to be themselves and that it's the journey. It's who do I become along this process, as I develop more courage, as I reason more correctly, as I'm more connected to life, and I help others do the same. Right? That's where the fulfillment comes from. And so it's like I relate to what you're saying in the sense that I don't really have goals either, but I find that at least for where I'm at, and I'm still, I think, recovering from type A tendencies, that sometimes it can be a hindrance. And
Mm.
so, again, like I'm sharing, part of the reason that I started this podcast is because I want to have more consistency. I want to show up more. I want to be of service more versus like I've had all this freedom, like I said, for 13 years. The only person I answer to is the great X, God, source, nature, whatever you want to call it to. And that's a huge responsibility, especially like if you lack discipline. It's easy to be carnal and so
Yes.
I'm working on being more now so that I can, do more, so I can share more. I don't really care about having more as far as physical stuff, but it's those internal attributes, having more peace, having more health, having more clarity. That's attractive to me. Those are my aspirations versus I had a lot more, physical desires before, and I don't really desire anything anymore. It's a really interesting place to be. I know I have more work to do and a lot more in my journey.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, that's beautiful. Whatever I can do to help with that, of course, will.
Thank you. Yeah, I just really appreciate you, sharing, being so candid. Like it's beautiful to get to know you. I'm wondering, if you just kind of feel into the present, what do you believe you're here to do?
To serve. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I'm here to serve. If I have to break it apart, then I'll say, oh, I have to serve myself and creation. But of course, I'm part of creation, so to serve creation is to serve myself. But I honestly believe that's why, I'm here, and I'd like to believe that's, what everybody else is here for too. It and again, possibly it's the element of faith, but I've always felt the deepest amount of meaning, of purpose, of I know why I'm here in this life. I know what God wants from me. I know what I'm doing. I know how I can be beneficial for my family, friends, my wife, my kids, simply by having that orientation of service. And so, it simplifies everything radically to a phenomenal point. You know, even within service, it's easy to overcomplicate it, right? Like I did work with people who were very sick and dying for a lot of years, and I had Zen teachers I was working with at the time. So I recently found out a friend of mine has a very advanced cancer, and she doesn't have long to live. But the way she's talking about it is she's going to live forever, right? She even said to me, like, you survived your cancer, so I think I'm going to survive mine. It's like, well, yours is really not mine, you know. Um, and so I didn't quite know what to say to her, and I reached out to one of my Zen teachers, and he was like, I don't see what the problem is. He's like, we are not here to judge, and we are not here to tell others. We are here to witness. We are here to serve. So all you are called upon to do with your friend, anyone else, is to witness, right? Is to serve, is to be there fully for her in whatever way she needs it. And that's not for me to say how she needs it, it's for her to say. And I cried when he told me that, because it was so cutting and so truthful and so loving, right? That it moved me profoundly. Of course, I think it's 1,000% right.
I really appreciate that, especially I connected with a friend yesterday who, he told me that he's not meant for this world and that he'll be going soon. Not too soon, but he feels his time is soon. And so, as you were sharing about your friend with cancer and how she's planning to stick around a long time, I'm just thinking about the power of like self-fulfilling prophecies. But I'm also appreciating like what you're saying about observing and witnessing, because that's something I do believe in, but I don't always practice it well.
Right.
With my friend, I like, because I've I've had experiences where I feel like I've had the opportunity to be taken out of this lifetime because of my thoughts. Right. And so when my friend shared this, I was relating back to my experiences where like I was in Hawaii climbing China walls, which is really not meant for tourists, and lots of people have been swept away there, and I got swept off of the cliff.
Yeah.
and and I know it was because of where I was in my head before then, and just I was kind of tempting nature. I don't know what the right term is there, but that was a wake up call for me. Like, hey, you know what? Like, if you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. But if you do, you gotta like show that you want to be here. So it's like I always kind of remind myself of that like I have more work to do and I want to be here, like no matter how hard it is. And I'm just thinking about my friend because it's like, I don't know if you can give me an answer, but it's, and others can relate to this too. It's like, I think that it's logical me knows that it's like selfish to try to keep people here if they really think that it's their time to go, and then I guess it's selfish me that wants to keep everybody here for as long as possible. But it's like you said, it's like when our work here is done, it's done. And a lot of us know when it's time, like, was it Yogananda? He knew when it was time, and some other teachers that I know, like they knew when it was their time. It's just it's an interesting thing to consider. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think it's very tricky because they're, with a unique situation like that, right? It requires a tremendous amount, I would say, wisdom, and then even almost like practical secular training. Like, are we entirely sure this person doesn't need mental health help, right? Maybe that alone is what he actually needs in the moment. It's the thing about it, though, is coming to terms with our fundamental powerlessness, right? Which is the fact that control is an illusion. It always is. We have zero control in this life. And I think so much of unhappiness is because we refuse to recognize that. And so when I've been presented with situations like that, I would consider like suicidal friends who I wasn't able to like, pull out of being suicidal, or addict friends who are, going to continue with the addiction, or just people who are on harmful paths in general. It's always like, it's not up to me, David, to reach into their lives and pull them to the light. It is up to me to do what is right by myself, by them, by the rest of creation. So I can say, like, are you sure you don't need mental health? I can get that for you. I can say to them, like, are you sure there's nobody who you want to talk to about this? And they can come back to me with no, 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 no. And there have even been a couple of times where I've called people's parents, right? And it's not because I was like, well, I can't do it, so I'm going to get their parents to force them to do it. It was just a conversation. I was like, have you talked to your parents about this? Are they aware of what's going on? Have you allowed them in your lives to help? And they've said no. So I've been like, all right, well, I don't want to live a life knowing I could have told your parents and I didn't, right? I don't want to be in the world that way. So I'm going to call them. I'm going to have that conversation, but I can't control the parents and I can't control them. I just know for my babies, I would want to know if one of them was an alcoholic. I would love the friend who called me and was like, your kid is addicted. And I wanted to give their parents that opportunity as well. But I was not attached to, being the person ultimately responsible for their salvation. Because as you know, Sarin, it's all up to us at the end of the day for that.
I appreciate that. Like with my friend, I'm going to be connecting with him. That's intended. And so I'm glad I have some other ideas to consider. You brought something up about control that reminded me of something you said earlier on about anger. And this is a new concept that I learned actually this week about like where anger comes from, and like how to truly forgive it is to like cancel the goal. And what that means is like we get angry at people or whatever because we're attached to them behaving a certain way, or even ourselves. And like if you cancel that attachment, right, then the anger goes away. So I thought that was a really neat, just a neat concept. So now, like, as I'm looking at forgiveness, I'm looking at forgiveness as like, it's canceling expectations. It's being okay with what is and recognizing like where I have control and don't have control. Cause, I'm still working through this. The old me just wants to like make the world a better place for everyone, but I know that's not logical. I know that's not possible. I know we all need challenges to evolve in consciousness, and so I'm still figuring out the balance there.
Yeah, of course. And that figuring out that balance might be, a pursuit across many lifetimes for you, right? It's a beautiful thing to pursue, and it's a great struggle, I think, to have in this life. Anger is a fascinating emotion to me because a lot of people will say, oh, Buddhists, they don't get angry. That's part of being a Buddhist. That's like, it's just so wrong. All Buddhists feel anger because we're human. And that's such a human emotion to feel. The difference is a trained Buddhist like myself will love their anger. I don't try to push away my anger. I welcome it in. I know it's trying to protect me, right? It's a loving emotion on a fundamental level. And so I welcome it in. And I'm like, what do you want to do? Why are you here? Tell me what's up. And then it's a little crazy, but a lot of times I'll have a conversation in my head with these emotions, right? Like, what do you want to do? Like, you tell me and let's hash it out. Let's talk it out. And no surprising, almost always anger's ideas are not good, but what's beautiful is I feel like when engaged in that way, like the anger will admit to it and it will move on, right? None of these emotions are permanent, not a single one. So no matter how much we feel something in the moment, it's still temporary, right? And so I know I just have to talk to anger, love it, welcome it enough for it to find its own sense of peace and to move on for another emotion to come in. Um, so yeah, I mean, that's how I've kind of how I'm working and training myself with those emotions.
Hmm. I appreciate that because my approach to, any undesirable feeling has been, to reason through it. Like, why am I feeling this? And ultimately when I keep asking why, I find out that I didn't reason correctly to begin with. And so it
Interesting.
just kind of it transmutes the energy into, something neutral or positive for me when I just keep asking why, especially if it's related to somebody else, right? Like, it's easy to point fingers at others, like, oh, well, they made me angry. No, the
Yeah.
anger's in me, or they made me sad. No, that sadness is in me. It's the same way that happiness is in me, and hope is in me. And it's just a matter of shifting, what am I focusing on? But also, like I said, reasoning through it, just asking why always helps me to address it better. Um, Something else you said that I apply in different aspects of my life is, if I'm feeling any kind of dis-ease in my body, I will thank it. And as a teacher, because I recognize it's a effect of something, a cause. And so I want to understand what caused it. And so instead of fighting with it, I will thank it and ask it to explain to me, like, similar, like, why are you here? What did I do to create this, this dis-ease in my body? And I find that that helps me to figure it out so that I change. There's a lot of personal responsibility that comes with it, but it seems to be a very sustainable way to help myself, especially through difficult times.
Yeah. Um, I think that's beautiful. One of the first things that really drew me to Buddhism was a monk, a Buddhist monk, telling me, he was like, "Well, what's going on with you that you're here?" I was like, "Well, I'm in chronic pain because of all this cancer and surgeries." And he's like, "Okay, but are you suffering?" And I was like, "I'm in chronic pain. Of course, I'm suffering." And he's like, "No, no, no, no." He's like, "Those are two different things." He's like, you feel pain and you don't want to feel pain. And because you're still in pain, even though you don't want to, you suffer, right? He's like, you need to disrupt that transference of wanting, not wanting, and focus just back on the sensation itself because the sensation is neutral. He's like, not only is it neutral, it's arguably good for you, right? To be able to understand there's damage to your body and so on and so forth. And that was such a profound teaching to me to learn that I could disrupt that process, right? That there was that power I did have over my own mind and the way it works. Um, that it was just overwhelming to me because I never got anything like that out of religion in the past.
Yeah, when you were sharing that story, I was reminded of, how animals respond to pain differently than humans,
Right.
and how, they don't, like, we dwell on it. Like, we almost make it worse because of the psychological aspect, because we're thinking about it, we don't like it, we don't want it, versus the animal will rest until they're better. They'll just adapt. They don't fight it, and most of us will try to fight it, and I find that that makes it worse. And again, that's why I try to go into it like just thinking it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Using what we do have control over, and I would say the only thing we actually have control over, which is how we respond, right?
Yeah.
The universe acts and our response is the one thing I think that we actually can shift. And that I think is almost our responsibility to do so.
Hmm. Thank you. So I'm curious, before I go into a closing concept, if there's anything else you would like to add to our conversation today.
I mean, you know, I'm I'm on this path, you know, ride or die. And I'm always open to people reaching out to me and asking to connect. I find because I do that, I end up learning as much, as anything I've actually been able to teach. So, to you, to anyone you know, to any of the listeners for this, I'm always open. I'm always available, and I'll do what I can, and I can promise you that. And if someone needs it, I hope they take advantage of that.
Mm. Thank you. And I can definitely testify that you are quite tolerant and open-minded, which is not always easy to find these days. And it's important, you know. So I really appreciate that about you and you being open to others connecting with you.
Thank you, Sareen. I really appreciate that.
So I'll go into a closing concept now. I am the place where God shines through, for God and I are one, not two. He wants me where and as I am. I need not fret, nor fear, nor plan. If I'll be relaxed and free, he'll carry out his work through me. Thank you again for joining me today, and thank you everyone for tuning in.